Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts, Mythgard Melee Edition. We're jumping into another replay. Now, this is from a recent testing session that I had with Ragnar. Shout out to Ragnar, and thank you for all of the games that we played. Hopefully, we can get into more testing before the Open. At the time of this recording, there's still a little bit of a window before the big event, but we're getting there close. We're getting there fast, rather. Now, in this particular game that we're going to be looking at, I was piloting Orange-Purple Rebels. Ragnar was running, rather, a blue-yellow rainbow variant. Now, both of us have had success with that particular build, myself in Open number 1 and Ragnar later on. Now, going into it, I wasn't real clear on exactly how this matchup plays out. So we're going to jump into it and see how it goes. So I ended up on the play here and started off with, admittedly, kind of exactly what you want. Turn 1 Storied Martyr. Now, Ragnar's opening hand isn't really anything to ignore either. He's able to lead off with Venom Fang Mutant, which, as I've talked about on multiple streams, is a significant problem for most aggressive decks, including Rebels. Now, I'm able to follow up the initial Martyr with an Agitator. The question in my mind, and I'm going to pause it briefly, is whether we should be bolstering. And I'm not real clear as to whether it's appropriate to play the Agitator or not. I elected to because we have the Martyr on 1, so we can get a buff. Additionally, it gives us another card to burn, and we want to hit double purple for the Eidolon, which is something that's not typically in a lot of these builds, but I happen to favor it because I think it helps out in the mirror, as well as in a number of other matchups. So, in this particular case, one of the drawbacks of playing it is, as mentioned, we don't get the bolster. So we don't have a charge on bolster, and on top of it, we're developing a minion that is not all that impressive. It still has 2 health, which means that it dies to, well, just about everything, short of, I don't know, sneezing on it. If you stare at this thing too hard, it's probably going to die, especially when you're playing things like Thunderclap and Magnus. So we'll move on from here and go into Ragnar's turn 2. Obviously, he's going to tag the Martyr. There's really no point not to, because it's going to happen regardless. But he does have the follow-up Be Many Falls in order to ensure that the mutant survives. It also allows him to start building his board so that he can ramp into other things later on. Additionally, it will also provide a consistent source of healing if needed. But we're going to bolster out a Martyr on 3 because a 3/3 is better than simply a 2/2. I mean, simple math, right? We could have alternatively powered out the Eidolon, but since the mutant is so far away, I didn't really care, and we could obviously do it later on when the mutant gets close enough. Now, since Ragnar decided to play the Knoll in front of the Martyr, we're going to pause again here. He has to maintain his life total at this point. We don't know, as the Rebel player, that he doesn't have Misanthropia yet. It's still early enough that he could burn into a Misanthropia. So right now it's turn 3, turn 4 he could burn yellow, turn 5 he burns yellow, plays Misanthropia. We don't know that he A, doesn't have enough yellow, and B, doesn't have the Misanthropia itself. So he has to try and save his health total as much as he can. While the deck does feature some healing, we're not talking about an enormous amount. The Be Many Falls has already been mentioned, and Harvester is typically in these lists. But realistically, even if you hit both Harvesters, you're what, healing 10? That sounds like a lot, but it can go away just like that depending on the opening draw and the follow-up plays from the Rebel deck. So here, we're able to continue developing this Rebel board. And because we hit double Martyr, it's just continuing to snowball, which is exactly what the deck wants to do. It wants to require your opponent to expend multiple cards to deal with each one of yours. And every time we eat one of Ragnar's minions, we're naturally building counters on the Colosseum, which just gives us more gas, more gas, more gas. And it's just pouring it in the tank, and we keep our foot on the pedal. That's the game plan, at least. Now, we could, of course, fall to the aforementioned Misanthropia, which again doesn't happen to be in Ragnar's hand, but it's a yellow control deck. It's going to be there. So there is a concern with overextending. You have to keep an eye on what your opponent has burned and whether they are likely to potentially play those cards. We still have a couple turns before it could even happen at all, let alone at this particular juncture. So we're okay to continue advancing. But we also have the opportunity to just bolster so that we can hold back, and then the follow-up play, which we clearly have, is even more threatening. Now, in this particular case, we're going to be able to set up some pretty mean things. Serpent Den is not really what you want into the Rebels deck, although it does buy you time. It'll eventually chip down the Brawler here. The problem is that it's free charges on the Colosseum. We're already up to 2. We're going to get 3 because the Eidolon and the Agitator are able to smash. This is a really bad position. However, at the same time, I have to, again, take note of Ragnar's gems. We don't know that he doesn't have a Misanthropia, but he just burned his other yellow. He could have another yellow and a Misanthropia in hand, or have the Misanthropia draw a yellow, or have the yellow draw the Misanthropia, whatever combination is necessary. However, we still have a threatening enough board that he kind of needs to do it if he has it, so we don't have to extend any further. Instead, we're going to build up charges on the bolster and make that even more dangerous, or really, the follow-up minion even more dangerous. So naturally, Ragnar doesn't happen to have it, so he has to go fishing with Bragi. Bragi also conveniently will block this, so all of this makes sense. He can potentially set up a Magnus or Misanthropia play. So we're playing sizable, chunky minions here. But additionally, we're able to pull the Bragi away and keep pressure on. So even at this stage, let's say Ragnar has to Misanthropia. He's technically ahead on cards. However, we're going to deal 1 off the Ink Brawler. The Brother Moonblade and the Eidolon are going to live, although the Eidolon doesn't matter that much, but it does have Blast, so it now further complicates Ragnar's minion placement. Like I said, the Moonblade will live, and then we can just follow it up with bolstered out Perry or bolstered out Arquebus. This is a pretty rough position for Ragnar to be in. We continue burning, although realistically, I think this might have been a mistake. It is worth it to get the bolster. Or it's valuable to get the bolster, we'll say. Worth it is what we're trying to determine. It's not clear whether we should have just waited, but getting the bolster means that Perry is probably coming down as a 5-5, which means that we can end the game in short order from there. So Ragnar, of course, is digging with Bragi. He's going to take the damage there. And because of the insane ability of Rainbow to allow you to play some of these things for free, he's able to play a fair amount of blockers and lock down a good portion of the board. Now, he's only at 9, not a huge stabilization effort, but you got to take what you can get. And of course, he has to play in this minion position, which is a little awkward and less than ideal simply because he has to avoid the Eidolon. Another reason that I like utilizing it. So we're able to power out a 4-4, and then we're powering out a buff Storied Martyr. Now, is that really appropriate? Maybe. We could have set up the insurance broker instead. We would have gotten a charge immediately, but we weren't likely to necessarily get the next one except through the blockers. Again, I was a little bit worried about Misanthropia, which is a little silly because now we've overextended to such an extent that it probably doesn't matter. So this is a little weird. You're kind of in no man's land where you could extend, you could hold back. I felt as though I was going to be more aggressive about this, but maybe we should have placed the minions differently. This could have been over here, because the damage from Bragi realistically doesn't matter. If Ragnar chooses to frenzy this snake off of Bragi, who cares? He clearly can't get in with the Harpy 1 because he's going to have to move it first. So we could have played the Martyr here, ignore Bragi and the snake, and then run the Martyr into Harpy 1 next turn to buff everything, as opposed to trying to trade over here. That probably would have been better. Or alternatively, as I said, we could have run out the insurance broker, and wherever, if it gets played here, we could then contest the snake for a free counter, quote-unquote free. We could place it here, and it would survive through each of these unless Ragnar invested time and energy into buffing Bragi, who's A, all the way on this end of the board, and therefore kind of irrelevant, and B, if he's wasting time killing the broker, that means we're spending time killing him. So it's not that big a deal. So realistically, I don't think that playing it over here was correct. I also am not sure whether playing it at all as compared to the broker is correct. Now, our burn decision this turn was another broker, which is, okay, that's fine. And again, we wanted to make sure that we can complete everything that we're doing. Whether we even needed this charge on the Martyr as opposed to saving it for a follow-up minion is also up for debate. Again, we could have put it here. If he chooses to buff either of these things to kill the Martyr and survive, great. He's wasting time on this side of the board and not over here. The argument against not buffing this, although buffing it doesn't really get us anywhere either, is that if Ragnar chooses to buff the snake, he gets a refund from the Serpent Den, and therefore he could potentially just end up eating the Martyr for, I don't want to say no cost, but less cost, and then he could still contest us on the other side of the board while removing the Martyr. Now, naturally, it's going to buff these two rebels, so he's not getting that much out of it. Point being is this isn't... Any time he spends over here instead of over here is good for us, so there's no point in us playing over here, especially with this enormous life lead. It's important to look for, even in these sort of games where we're just trying to keep the pressure on, keep our foot on the gas, and you'll see we end up taking the win, spoiler alert. It's important to point out that you could have optimal plays because these are things to remember in other games, future games, where you may not be in this advantageous of a position, and this could have cost us. I played plenty of games where a singular misplaced minion can punt a game away. And I think we all have played those games. So it's important to recognize when things like this come up. Not that it was the only one in this game, but just saying. So from here, Ragnar is forced to dig. Obviously, as we said, there's no point in frenzying any of these things. He ends up replacing the Knoll. It accelerates him a little bit, but there's not really much that he can do here. He's going to heal a little bit, clear some minions. But Harpy is still, or was still being locked down. We can still get through with the parry. There was an argument that maybe Ragnar, instead of healing, should have blocked here. But ultimately, we have a Dark Passenger, which we top deck in order to try and both eliminate the Harpy, but also clear blockers. So it clears that out. Okay, we get fragiled, whatever. We're going to draw a card. This has Lurker, so it's not a big deal. We do the old punch him in the face plan and just keep pushing. Now, at this stage, we're clearly ahead. Our opponent's at 3. We have a solid board position. We have them in check, so to speak. We're even on cards, despite trading all these things and advancing our board and dying to things like Magnus, etc. However, again, he was always one gem away, and the actual card itself from Misanthropia. A follow-up Thunderclap could have been very bad, because a Thunderclap plus blocker means that we can't really or necessarily get through. Obviously, we have Racer ready for anything in Metamorphosis. We have options, but it would have made our lives significantly more complicated, as well as removing our Agile character, our Agile minion. So this means that, like I said, blockers and things are much more relevant. We happen to have all the tools here. So the spider web here is actually pretty unfortunate for us, the Goliath's web, because it removes the Agile from parry, so again, blockers. Taking advantage of Rainbow's ability to, ramp in this scenario, but replace the relevant mana, refund the relevant mana. Now, we're ultimately able to crash through anyway, it doesn't really matter, but things could have gone slightly differently. Overall, we played a few of these games, and it appears that Rebels is at an advantage. It can draw a ton of cards, whether it's through Coliseum, it's through Insurance Broker, or just simple things like Perry replacing itself, and the virtual card advantage of forcing multiple X for 1s, because most of the removal in the blue-yellow deck and Rainbow as a whole relies on damage. If you can exceed their common damage thresholds, namely 2, you're going to force multiple cards out of your opponent and therefore accrue card advantage over time as they need to expend more cards to deal with yours. It's all about literal and virtual card advantage with the Rebel deck. Now, we didn't get to play as many games against the blue-orange build, but I'm trusting Ragnar's judgment when he mentioned that he feels that it goes in a similar way. Since we have Ready for Anything, even against the blue-orange builds that feature Stormseer, again, Worded and Armor, either one is going to try and push those things out. Only one of them probably would be enough. Both are clearly going to help lock things down. In speaking with other players, such as Dryas, who played or I guess in this case, originated the current iteration of the blue-orange rainbow builds, they indicated that it also, the rainbow build was kind of an underdog depending on whether Ready for Anything shows up, how many copies, and how aggressive of a start that the Rebel deck gets. Based on both what I've played and what I've seen from observing games, this seems to be pretty much consistent. So if you're looking for a way to beat up on those rainbow decks, and I know I have been, maybe Rebels is your choice. But that'll do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.